My name is Maximilian, but everyone calls me Max. At 28, I finally achieved my dream of buying my first house after years of saving while working as a software developer. The pride I felt walking through my own front door was indescribable, especially coming from a family where privacy was just a theoretical concept. Never did I imagine that my sanctuary would be invaded so quickly until that Tuesday evening when I came home, exhausted to find my parents casually sitting in my living room like they owned the place. Before I continue this story, drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from. Hit that like button and subscribe to see more stories about standing your ground against family overreach. Growing up in the Morgan household meant accepting that privacy was a luxury, not a right. My father Richard, a micromanaging accountant, and my mother Karen, a helicopter parent before the term was even coined, operated on the firm belief that family has no boundaries. This philosophy manifested in countless ways throughout my childhood and teenage years. When I was 13, my father installed monitoring software on my computer that forwarded my internet history directly to his email. I discovered this humiliating setup when he confronted me about researching a paper on the French Revolution, concerned about my interest in violent historical events. At 15, my mother regularly tidied my room, which was her euphemism for reading my private journal. She would casually reference my personal thoughts at dinner, offering unsolicited advice on friendships and crushes, while my father nodded approvingly. My 17th birthday gift was a smartphone, which came with the condition that they would have my password and could check it any time. When I expressed discomfort, my father's response was always the same. "We're your parents. We have a right to know everything about you. When you pay your own bills, then you can have secrets." This mantra was repeated so often it became the unofficial family motto. College at Arizona State became my first taste of genuine freedom. The 6-hour drive from our Sacramento home created enough distance that their oversight became impractical. I thrived in this newfound independence, making the dean's list consistently while managing my own schedule, friendships, and decisions without parental input for the first time. After graduation, I moved into a series of shared apartments with roommates from college. My parents viewed these living situations as temporary, referring to them as my practice homes until I would naturally move back to Sacramento. They never understood that every career decision, every dollar saved, was part of my strategy to build permanent independence. My job at Rapid Tech, a growing software company, demanded long hours and complete dedication. While my colleagues complained about the workload, I volunteered for overtime and weekend projects. Every extra dollar went straight into my house fund. My supervisor, Blake, noticed my determination and took me under his wing, accelerating my promotion track and increasing my saving potential. After 4 years of aggressive saving and a modest inheritance from my grandfather, the only family member who seemed to understand my need for autonomy, I had enough for a down payment. The house hunting process was exhaustive. I viewed 67 properties over 8 months, researched neighborhood crime statistics, property tax histories, and potential appreciation rates. I wanted my investment to be sound, and my decision unimpeachable when my parents inevitably questioned it. The perfect house appeared when I least expected it, a 1950s bungalow with 2 bedrooms, 1.5 bathrooms, hardwood floors beneath tired carpet, and good bones disguised by outdated fixtures. Located in Roseville, it was 30 minutes from my parents' house, close enough to visit but too far for casual drop-ins. At least that's what I thought. The previous owner, an elderly widow moving to assisted living, accepted my offer despite higher bids because I wrote a letter promising to restore the home's original character. The day I signed the closing papers was the first time I truly felt like an adult. The weight of the house keys in my palm represented everything I had worked for. The first 2 months of homeownership were a revelation in peace and self-determination. I established morning routines that began with coffee on my small back porch, listening to birds instead of parental commentary about my career trajectory. Weekends became dedicated to restoration projects, stripping decades of paint from original window frames, refinishing hardwood floors, and learning plumbing basics through YouTube tutorials and numerous trips to the hardware store. My best friend Nathan helped me install ceiling fans and paint the kitchen cabinets navy blue, a color my mother would have vetoed as too dark. But that brought me joy every morning. My colleague Amelia taught me to propagate houseplants that gradually filled sunny corners. These friends, chosen family rather than assigned, celebrated my independence without questioning my decisions. 6 weeks after moving in, I hosted my first dinner party. 7 friends squeezed around my vintage dining table, eating lasagna from mismatched plates and drinking wine from mason jars because I hadn't yet purchased proper glassware. The house hummed with conversation and laughter, christening it as truly mine. As my friends left that night, each one commented on how the house already reflected my personality, organized but comfortable, modest but thoughtful. My parents had visited only once for an awkward housewarming where my mother pointed out every imperfection while my father calculated aloud how much equity I could build before upgrading to a family home. They left after an hour, clearly disappointed that I hadn't consulted them on the purchase. Their parting words, "We're just a phone call away. When you need help fixing this place up," carried an assumption that such calls were inevitable and imminent. I didn't call. Instead, I reveled in addressing each home improvement challenge myself or with friends who respected my vision. The growing confidence in my capabilities extended beyond homeownership into other aspects of my life. I began speaking up more in meetings at work. I started dating with clearer boundaries. I was becoming the version of myself that had always existed beneath my parents' expectations. This peaceful existence lasted exactly 63 days. The day that everything changed began, like many others, with a coding crisis at work. Our team had discovered a critical security vulnerability in our flagship product just hours before a major client demo. What should have been a 9-hour workday stretched into 12 as we frantically patched the issue, ran diagnostics, and prepared documentation for the executive team. By 7:30 that evening, my eyes burned from staring at screens, my shoulders ached from hunching over keyboards, and my patience had worn microscopically thin. My only consolation was the thought of my quiet house, waiting for me, specifically the leftover Thai curry in my refrigerator and the expensive bottle of Blanton's bourbon I'd been saving to celebrate my first successful solo project deployment. I stopped at Magnolia Market on the way home to grab fresh limes for my planned celebration drink. The cashier commented on my exhausted appearance, joking that I looked like I needed the entire produce section, not just citrus. Her simple human connection momentarily lifted my mood as I drove the final stretch home, watching sunset colors paint the sky in hues of orange and pink. As I turned onto my street, the familiar sense of pride warmed my chest at the sight of my modest home, until I noticed the lights glowing through my living room windows. My porch light, which operated on a timer and shouldn't have activated for another hour, cast a yellow pool on my front steps. My car slowed involuntarily as confusion gave way to alarm. Had I left lights on this morning? Impossible. My programmable habit of checking them twice before leaving was borderline compulsive. Was someone breaking in? The neighborhood had experienced a string of minor burglaries last month. My heart hammered against my ribs as I parked across the street rather than in my driveway, giving myself space to assess the situation. I called Nathan, speaking in hushed tones as I explained the situation. He advised calling the police, but something in my gut urged caution. "Let me peek through the window first," I whispered, approaching my own home like a trespasser. As I crept up the side path toward the bay window, the sound of familiar laughter froze me in place. Through a gap in the curtains I hadn't fully closed that morning, I saw them, my parents, comfortably ensconced on my sofa, as if they belonged there. My mother sat with her shoes off, feet tucked beneath her, flipping through a home decor magazine I didn't recognize. My father, tumbler in hand, was watching my television and helping himself to the Blantons I had been saving. The surreal sight momentarily disconnected me from reality. Had I given them a key I'd forgotten about? Had we planned a visit that slipped my mind during the workday chaos? No, neither explanation fit. This was unauthorized entry regardless of our blood relation. I ended the call with Nathan promising to update him later and took 3 deep breaths before inserting my key into the lock. The sound prompted immediate movement inside. As I pushed open the door carrier bag of limes dangling from one wrist and laptop bag from the other, my parents looked up with expressions not of guilt, but of casual expectation. "There you are," my mother exclaimed, as if I were late to an appointment in my own home. "We were wondering when you'd get back." The living room I had left immaculate that morning, had been subtly rearranged. My reading chair now angled toward the television instead of the window. A new throw blanket I'd never seen covered part of my sofa. A vase of fresh flowers, lilies that would aggravate my allergies, dominated my coffee table. "What are you doing here?" I asked, my voice emerging steadier than I felt. "And how did you get in?" My mother smiled indulgently, the expression she typically reserved for what she considered my amusing overreactions. From her purse, she extracted a silver house key attached to a keychain, featuring a photo of our family from my high school graduation. "We thought we'd surprise you." She waved the key like it was a completely normal thing to possess without my knowledge. "Now it's family property, so let's not make a big deal out of it. I brought some proper curtains for that window. The ones you chose are letting in too much morning sun. You'll never get proper rest." My father took another sip of my bourbon, and added, "Your mother was worried you weren't eating right living alone. We brought lasagna, a real one, not that vegetarian nonsense you've been experimenting with. It's in the fridge." The casual invasion left me momentarily speechless. My gaze traveled from the key in my mother's hand to the bourbon in my father's, then to the stack of home improvement magazines, now occupying the side table where my computer science journals had been. While I processed this violation, my mother had already stood and was moving toward my kitchen. "I reorganized your pantry honestly. Max alphabetizing spices. Who has time for that? I grouped them by function instead. Much more efficient when you're actually cooking." Something in me snapped. Not violently, not dramatically, but with the quiet finality of a thread pulled beyond its tensile strength. I set down my bags, walked calmly to my front door, and held it open wide. A cool evening breeze swept in, carrying the scent of my neighbor's jasmine. I smiled, not the accommodating smile they were accustomed to, but one that didn't reach my eyes. "I never gave you a key," I said evenly, "because I never invited you to enter my home without permission. This isn't family property. It's my property, purchased with my money, maintained with my labor. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to leave right now, return my key, and call before visiting in the future, like everyone else in my life respects enough to do." The stunned expressions that transformed their faces would have been comical in any other context. My mother's mouth opened and closed without sound. My father's hand froze halfway to his lips, bourbon catching amber light. The silence that followed my declaration lasted approximately 3 seconds before my mother's eyes welled with tears, her standard response to not getting her way. These weren't the quiet, dignified tears of genuine hurt, but the performative kind designed to immediately shift me into the role of villain. "How could you speak to us this way?" she gasped, pressing one hand to her chest as if physically wounded. "After everything we've done for you, we raised you, educated you, supported you, and now we're not even welcome in your home." My father set down the tumbler with deliberate slowness, a gesture I recognized from childhood confrontations. It preceded his transitioning from casual dismissiveness to authoritarian anger. "You need to watch your tone, Maximilian," he said, using my full name as he always did, when asserting dominance. "Your mother went to considerable trouble to help you today. The proper response is gratitude, not this teenage rebellion. I thought you'd outgrown this phase." I remained in position, door open, expression neutral. My tone is perfectly appropriate for someone finding uninvited people in their home. "The key, please." My mother's tears escalated to quiet sobs as she looked to my father for support. He stood drawing himself up to his full height, a tactic that had intimidated me as a child, but now struck me as almost desperate. "We're your parents," he said, as if stating this fact automatically granted them immunity from normal social boundaries. "We don't need permission to check on our son. Your mother was worried about you living alone. She hasn't slept properly since you moved in here." "My living situation isn't responsible for Mom's insomnia," I replied. "And being my parents doesn't entitle you to break into my house. The key, please." My mother's crying abruptly ceased as she realized her usual tactic wasn't working. She switched strategies, moving toward me with arms outstretched for a hug. "Honey, we just want to be part of your life." "Is that so terrible? We miss you." I sidestepped the embrace, maintaining my position by the door. "There are respectful ways to be part of my life. This isn't one of them. The key, please." The standoff continued for another 15 minutes. My parents cycled through their entire emotional repertoire: guilt, anger, dismissiveness, faux concern, and finally wounded martyrdom. I repeated my request for the key 11 times before my mother finally extracted it from her purse and placed it on my entry table, rather than handing it directly to me, a small but telling act of passive aggression. "I hope you realize how hurtful you're being," she said, gathering her purse, and the shopping bags that I now noticed contained additional unauthorized improvements for my home. "We only wanted to help." My father drained the last of my bourbon before standing. "When you calm down and think rationally about this, you'll realize you're overreacting. Family helps family, Max. That's how it works. Boundaries help families," I countered. "That's how healthy relationships work." As they reluctantly moved toward the door, my mother paused to add, "I left some notes on your refrigerator about improvements this place needs. The bathroom caulking is atrocious, and those kitchen cabinets are too dark for such a small space. We can help you fix everything next weekend." "I won't be available next weekend," I said, not elaborating that my unavailability would extend indefinitely until they demonstrated respect for my autonomy. Their departure from my property featured the kind of dramatic exit my mother had perfected over years of domestic disagreements. Loud sighs, backward glances, and one final parting shot from my father. "When you own a house, you realize how too much help you need. Don't be too proud to call when things start breaking, which they will." I closed the door behind them, engaged the deadbolt, and leaned against the solid wood surface, heart pounding as if I'd run a marathon. The house felt different now, contaminated by their presence, in a way that transcended the physical rearrangements. A methodical inspection of my home revealed the full extent of their interference. My mother had indeed reorganized my pantry, grouping spices in a system comprehensible only to her. She'd replaced my shower curtain with a floral pattern that clashed with my bathroom tiles. My carefully curated bookshelf had been rearranged with certain books, notably those on personal boundaries and psychology, mysteriously relegated to the bottom shelf. Most disturbingly, my home office showed signs of thorough examination. Computer cables that I meticulously arranged in a specific pattern had been unplugged and reconnected haphazardly. My filing cabinet drawer wasn't fully closed, a cardinal sin in my organizational system, and my notebook containing personal reflections and future plans had been moved from its drawer to the desktop. The refrigerator bore 7 yellow sticky notes with my mother's looping handwriting, each detailing urgent improvements ranging from "replace bathroom faucet, current one wastes water," to "consider lighter curtains, too masculine and dark." In here, the final note simply read, "Spare bedroom would make perfect nursery someday. Let's discuss paint colors next visit." Sleep evaded me that night despite my physical exhaustion. I lay awake replaying the confrontation, analyzing whether I could have handled it differently while still maintaining my boundaries. Around 2 in the morning, my phone began buzzing with text messages. From Mom. "Just checking you're okay. You seemed very stressed. Remember, your blood pressure tends to run high like your father's alder. Tends to halder. Juster." From Dad. "Your mother is upset. Call her tomorrow and apologize. We're only trying to help." From Mom again. "Found this article about the dangers of living alone. Sending you the link. Lots of break-ins in Sacramento area recently." From Dad again. "That bourbon is overpriced. I can recommend better options that don't drain your savings. Financial responsibility comes before luxury purchases." I silenced my phone, but damage was done to my sense of security. Even with them physically gone, their presence lingered in these digital intrusions. The pattern was so familiar: boundary violation, followed by making me responsible for their emotional reactions to my reasonable limits. As dawn broke, I made 2 decisions. First, I would change my locks immediately. Second, I would not respond to the texts establishing an information boundary to complement the physical one. Little did I know that both these strategies would prove woefully insufficient in the weeks to come. The locksmith arrived at 7:30 the next morning, replacing both my front and back door locks with high security models that couldn't be easily duplicated. His raised eyebrow at my urgency and willingness to pay rush fees spoke volumes, but professional discretion kept him from asking questions. By 8:15, I had new keys and a restored sense of security that proved embarrassingly short-lived. The following Monday, I was deep in code review when our receptionist Stephanie called my desk extension. "Your parents are in the lobby," she said, confusion evident in her voice. "They say they're surprising you with lunch." The familiar tightness returned to my chest as I explained I wasn't available. Stephanie, bless her, offered to convey this message, sparing me direct confrontation. Through the glass partition separating our work area from the reception, I watched my mother's expression shift from expectant to disappointed to determined. For 20 minutes they remained in the lobby, my father periodically checking his watch, while my mother engaged Stephanie in what appeared to be increasingly uncomfortable conversation. When they finally left, Stephanie brought a paper bag to my desk. "They insisted you needed a proper lunch because you looked thin in your Facebook profile picture from last month. Inside I found a turkey sandwich with mayonnaise, which I'm allergic to, an apple acceptable, and a handwritten note reading, 'Since you're too busy for family, at least eat something nutritious. We'll try again when you're less focused on impressing your boss than maintaining relationships that actually matter.'" Wednesday brought a new intrusion. Arriving home from work, I discovered grocery bags on my front porch, perishables like milk and meat, left unrefrigerated for unknown hours. My mother's handwriting on a note taped to one bag read, "Noticed your fridge was nearly empty on Monday. No wonder you're losing weight. Let yourself in to put these away, but your key doesn't work anymore. Call locksmith, something wrong with your new locks." By Friday, the escalation continued. My neighbor Derek, a retired teacher I'd befriended during weekend yard work, approached me as I arrived home. "Your father was here for about 2 hours today," he reported. "Said you asked him to check for foundation issues. He was walking the perimeter of your house, looking in windows and checking the crawl space access. Seemed odd he didn't have a key, but he showed me a photo of you two together, so I didn't call anyone." I thanked Derek for the information while inwardly calculating the implications. My father had no background in construction or foundation work. His inspection was merely pretext for surveillance, and involving my neighbor represented a new level of manipulation, recruiting others into enabling their boundary violations. The weekend brought no respite. Saturday morning, a locksmith, not the one I had used, knocked on my door with a work order called in by the homeowner to create new keys. When I explained I hadn't placed this order, he showed me the service request form listing my father's name and contact information. I sent the locksmith away and immediately received a text from my father, "Just trying to help with your lock situation. No need to be difficult." Sunday morning, my mother happened to attend the same service at my new church, sitting next to me before I realized her presence and introducing herself to everyone in my row as Max's mother, who he doesn't visit enough. During coffee hour afterward, she managed to distribute her phone number to 3 church members, encouraging them to call if Max ever needs anything, since he's all alone in that big house. The social pressure extended beyond my parents' direct actions. By the second week after the initial incident, extended family members began reaching out. Aunt Patricia called to tell me I was breaking your mother's heart with this childish independence kick. Uncle George emailed articles about elder care and the importance of maintaining family connections before it's too late. My cousin Stephen, with whom I'd always been close, texted to ask, "What's this I hear about you banning your parents from your house?" Meanwhile, 3 friends from high school, people I hadn't spoken with in years, suddenly contacted me on social media with variations of, "Heard you're having family troubles and your mom seems really upset." The coordinated nature of these outreaches confirmed my suspicion. My parents were systematically working to create external pressure that would force me back into compliance with their expectations. The breaking point arrived 3 weeks after the initial incident. Working late to avoid going home, a psychological state I hadn't experienced since high school, I finally returned to my house around 9 in the evening. The porch light illuminated a scene that stopped me at the threshold. Through my living room window, I could see that every kitchen cabinet door stood open. Drawers had been pulled out. The contents of my pantry appeared rearranged yet again. Moving through my home in growing disbelief, I discovered my mother had completely reorganized my kitchen, according to her system, discarding storage containers she deemed unnecessary and labeling shelves with her preferred arrangements. In my home office, my father had fixed my computer desk by raising it 2 inches with wooden blocks, leaving a note explaining this was better ergonomically for someone your height. My carefully calibrated monitor setup had been adjusted, cables rerouted, and most alarmingly, my external backup drive was now connected differently. A check of my security camera footage installed after the lock change revealed they had convinced my next-door neighbor Lisa that they were bringing surprise renovations while I was at work. Lisa, who had never met them before, had been persuaded to let them access my backyard where they retrieved the emergency key I kept hidden for legitimate emergencies. This violation transcended mere boundary crossing. It represented a complete dismissal of my explicit wishes and a sophisticated campaign to undermine my independence. As I stood in my rearranged kitchen, a sudden clarity emerged through the fog of frustration. Changing locks wasn't enough. I needed a comprehensive strategy to address the psychological and social dimensions of this conflict, not just the physical access. The next morning, instead of going to work, I called in sick for the first time in 3 years and scheduled an emergency appointment with Dr. Rachel Winters, a therapist I'd been seeing occasionally to work through childhood patterns. I arrived at her office with dark circles under my eyes and a 3-page typed list of boundary violations that had occurred in just 3 weeks. What we're seeing is a extinction burst, Dr. Winters explained after reviewing my situation. When entrenched behaviors are suddenly met with resistance, they often intensify dramatically before subsiding. Your parents are escalating because your boundaries threaten their sense of control and identity as parents. For 90 minutes, we developed a strategic intervention plan. I needed clear, enforceable boundaries with specific consequences, delivered in a neutral setting where my parents couldn't control the environment. Dr. Winters role-played potential parental responses with me, preparing me for the emotional manipulation tactics that would inevitably follow. Remember, she emphasized as our session concluded, their reaction to reasonable boundaries is information about them, not about the validity of your needs. You have both the right and the responsibility to protect your physical and emotional space. That afternoon, I consulted with Anthony Garcia, a college friend who had become a real estate attorney. He outlined my legal options regarding unwanted entry, emphasizing that while pursuing legal action against family was emotionally complicated, documenting each incident would strengthen my position if restraining orders ever became necessary. Send a certified letter explicitly revoking permission to enter your property, Anthony advised. It creates a paper trail and clarifies that future entries constitute trespassing regardless of familial relationship. Armed with professional guidance, I executed the next phase of my plan. I texted my parents inviting them to dinner at Castellano's, an upscale Italian restaurant equidistant from our homes. The neutral territory would prevent scenes. My mother hated public embarrassment more than almost anything, while the reservation time, 6:30 on Tuesday evening, would naturally limit the interaction's duration due to the restaurant's popularity and table turnover. Their response was immediate and revealing. My father texted, "Finally coming to your senses. Your mother will be pleased." My mother called within minutes, already planning to arrive early to discuss some ideas for your guest bathroom renovation. These responses confirmed they interpreted my invitation not as a boundary-setting conversation, but as capitulation, exactly as Dr. Winters had predicted. Tuesday evening arrived with stomach-churning anxiety I hadn't experienced since college finals. I deliberately arrived 20 minutes early to secure our table and establish psychological home field advantage, but discovered my parents already seated, my mother rearranging the table settings, and my father questioning the waiter about wine selections my son might enjoy. We took the liberty of ordering appetizers, my mother announced as I sat down. "You always take too long to decide, and the bruschetta here is apparently exceptional. And I've selected a Barolo that won't break your budget," my father added. "The markup on wine in restaurants is highway robbery, but this one's reasonable." Their presumptiveness extending even to this meal I had initiated and would be paying for perfectly illustrated the dynamic I needed to address. I waited until after drink orders and appetizers, allowing the social ritual to establish a veneer of normalcy before introducing the actual purpose of our gathering. "I invited you tonight because we need to discuss something important." I began, keeping my voice measured despite my racing heart. "The current dynamic between us isn't working, and I want to establish healthier patterns before our relationship suffers permanent damage." My mother immediately reached for my hand across the table. "We've been so worried about exactly that. You've been distant and cold, and we're concerned about your isolation in that house. Your father and I have been talking about—" "Please let me finish," I interrupted gently but firmly. "This isn't about my house or my lifestyle choices. It's about boundaries and respect between adults." I removed a small note card from my pocket, not because I needed notes for this conversation I'd rehearsed repeatedly, but because the physical object provided a concrete focus. I want to be clear about 3 specific boundaries going forward. First, no one enters my home without explicit invitation each time. Having a key which was obtained without my knowledge doesn't constitute ongoing permission to enter. My father's expression darkened. "That's ridiculous. We're family, not strangers." Second, I continued as if he hadn't spoken. "My personal and professional spaces are mine to organize and maintain according to my preferences. Commentary or criticism about my decorating organization or lifestyle choices is only welcome when I specifically ask for input." My mother's eyes widened. "So we're supposed to pretend we don't notice when you're living in conditions that aren't up to—" Third, I pressed on communication with my friends, colleagues, neighbors, or extended family about me needs my consent. Recruiting others to pressure me is inappropriate and damages multiple relationships, not just ours. The silence that followed lasted through the arrival of our main courses. My mother stared at her pasta without touching it, tears forming but held in check by the public setting. My father methodically cut his chicken parmesan into precise squares, a controlling gesture I recognized from childhood dinners after I'd disappointed him. "So that's it," he finally said. "You've unilaterally decided we're toxic influences to be managed. I've decided I'm an adult who deserves the same respect you'd give any other adult," I clarified. "These boundaries aren't punishments. They're the foundation of a healthier relationship where we can actually enjoy each other's company without underlying resentment." My mother's composure finally broke. "After everything we've sacrificed for you," she said, voice rising despite the restaurant setting, "this is how you repay us, by treating us like intruders, by embarrassing us in public with this intervention." Several nearby diners glanced our way. The waiter approaching with water refills diverted to another table. "I'm not trying to embarrass anyone," I said quietly. "That's why I chose a private table in a restaurant, instead of having this conversation in my living room or yours. I'm trying to find a way forward that respects everyone's needs." "Your needs seem to be excluding your family from your life," my father countered, voice tight with controlled anger. "That's not a boundary, Max. It's rejection of the people who made you who you are." "I'm not excluding you," I explained. "I'm asking for interactions based on mutual respect, rather than assumed authority. You're welcome in my life and my home with invitation and consideration for my autonomy." The conversation deteriorated rapidly from there. My mother abandoned any pretense of composure, tears flowing freely, as she detailed sacrifices made during my childhood music lessons I'd begged for, and sports equipment they'd scrimped and saved to provide. My father transitioned from cold anger to overt threats, suggesting they might need to rethink financial help with your student loans. Loans I had been managing independently since graduation, and reconsider the inheritance discussions. We've been having a manipulative reference to hypothetical future money I'd never factored into my planning. When my mother began loudly recounting my childhood medical emergencies and how she'd slept beside your hospital bed for 3 nights when you had pneumonia drawing stares from nearby tables, I recognized the futility of continuing. This public venue chosen to prevent exactly this scene had instead become theater for their emotional performance. I signaled for the check paid while they were still mid-argument, and stood to leave. "I care about you both," I said quietly. "That's why I'm trying to establish a relationship that works for all of us as adults. I hope you'll consider what I've said once emotions aren't running so high." My father's parting words as I walked away. "Don't expect us to come running next time you need help with that money," Pithouse echoed in my ears as I drove home simultaneously, relieved the confrontation was over and devastated by its predictable failure. The failed dinner conversation made one thing abundantly clear: verbal boundaries alone would never suffice. The following morning I implemented the comprehensive security plan Anthony had helped me develop. A locksmith installed commercial-grade deadbolts with keys that couldn't be duplicated without signed authorization forms. Electronic keypads with programmable codes replaced traditional locks on both exterior doors, allowing me to grant temporary access when appropriate without distributing physical keys. A complete security system followed door sensors, motion detectors, and window alarms connected to a monitoring service with my parents explicitly listed as unauthorized users who could not request system overrides. The doorbell camera I'd installed earlier was supplemented with additional exterior cameras covering all potential entry points, with footage backing up to cloud storage I alone could access. Derek, my retired neighbor who had previously been unwittingly recruited into my parents' schemes, became a valuable ally once I explained the situation. My sister pulled similar stunts with my nephew, he confided. Some folks can't accept when the parent-child relationship evolves. I'll keep an eye out and let you know if they show up while you're at work. I provided similar context to my direct neighbors on both sides and across the street, framing the situation tactfully, as my parents are having trouble respecting boundaries as I establish independence, rather than detailing the full extent of their violations. This network of aware neighbors created a community safety net without burning bridges through excessive disclosure. The physical security measures addressed only one dimension of the problem. The emotional boundaries required equally rigorous protection. I drafted a clear email to both parents establishing a 2-week communication pause to allow everyone space to process our dinner conversation. I specified that during this period I would not respond to calls, texts, emails, or social media contacts from either of them, nor would I engage with extended family members or friends acting as intermediaries. After this cooling-off period, I wrote, "I welcome text communication as we rebuild trust. In-person visits can resume once we've established a pattern of respectful digital interaction with advance notice and explicit invitation required each time." The response was predictable but still painful. My mother called 7 times in the hour after receiving my email, leaving increasingly distraught voicemails ranging from, "I can't believe you'd cut off your own mother," to, "What if there's a family emergency?" My father's approach was more coldly strategic, with a single email outlining all the ways my immature behavior would damage my relationships, career prospects, and future happiness. True to my word, I didn't respond to either, though each contact tested my resolve. I temporarily muted family members on social media and created email filters to direct their messages to a folder I could review when emotionally prepared, rather than having them ambush my inbox. The first test of my new boundaries came sooner than expected. 3 days into the communication pause, my security system alerted me to activity at my front door while I was at work. Live video showed my parents attempting to use a key in my newly changed locks, then pressing the doorbell repeatedly. When these efforts failed, my father circled to the back door, while my mother remained at the front, creating a 2-pronged attempt to gain entry. Finding all access points secured, they eventually retreated to their car, where they remained parked in front of my house for 27 minutes. The entire incident was recorded from multiple angles, providing documentation I hoped never to need, but felt reassured to possess. I maintained my composure and called them from my office phone, which they wouldn't recognize on caller ID. When my mother answered, I calmly stated, "I can see you're at my house right now through my security cameras. This violates the boundary I established about visits requiring invitation. Please leave my property immediately. We can discuss this after the 2-week communication pause we agreed upon." My father grabbed the phone. "This is ridiculous, Max. Your mother brought homemade soup because she heard from Stephanie's cousin that there's a stomach bug going around your office. We're trying to help, not invade." The mention of Stephanie, our receptionist whom they'd met exactly once during their workplace lunch, ambush, and her cousin, someone I'd never met, illustrated how extensively they were tracking my life through social connections. This revelation strengthened my resolve. "I understand you believe you're helping," I replied evenly. "However, I've been clear about my boundaries. Please respect them by leaving now and honoring the communication pause we discussed." They left, but not without my mother placing the soup container prominently on my front step directly in view of my camera. A passive-aggressive acknowledgement that they knew they were being recorded. As challenging as this confrontation was, It represented my first successful enforcement of a boundary with real-time consequences. I had remained calm, asserted my position clearly, and followed through without capitulating to emotional manipulation. It was a small victory, but a significant one in the larger campaign for relationship recalibration. The unexpected ally emerged a week into the communication pause. My phone displayed an unfamiliar number one evening which I almost ignored, assuming it was another parental end run around my boundaries. Something compelled me to answer, revealing my father's sister, Aunt Rebecca, whom I'd always liked but rarely saw due to her living in Colorado. "I hope you don't mind me calling out of the blue," she began, "but your mother has been calling me daily about your rebellion, and I thought I should hear your side before forming opinions." For the first time since this ordeal began, I found myself speaking with someone who truly understood the dynamic at play. Rebecca shared her own history of boundary struggles with my parents, particularly my mother's tendency to rearrange her home during visits, and my father's financial commentary disguised as advice. "They did the same thing when I bought my condo after my divorce," she revealed. "Showed up unannounced, had keys made, somehow rearranged my bedroom as a surprise. When I confronted them, your mother cried for 3 days and your father suggested my hormones were making me ungrateful." Rebecca's validation that I wasn't overreacting or being unreasonable provided a psychological anchor I desperately needed. Her perspective, as someone who loved my parents but recognized their boundary issues, offered balanced insight without the bias of my emotional involvement. "It took me nearly 2 years of consistent boundaries before they accepted my autonomy," she admitted. "There were many backslides and guilt trips, but eventually we reached a workable relationship. Not perfect, but functional. You can get there too, but only if you hold firm now when it's hardest." She offered to speak with them as a neutral third party, explaining how their behavior appeared from an outside perspective and potentially helping them understand the damage they were causing to our relationship. I gratefully accepted, recognizing that sometimes messages received from peers carry weight that the same words from children, even adult children, cannot. The conversation with Aunt Rebecca marked a turning point in my approach. I had been conceptualizing the situation as a binary conflict, my boundaries versus their invasion, but she helped me see it as a difficult transition, requiring adjustment from all parties. This reframing didn't excuse their behavior, but contextualized it in ways that made it less personally hurtful and more recognizable as their limitation rather than my failure. The path to a new equilibrium wasn't swift or straightforward, but it was steady. The 2-week communication pause extended to 3 when my parents attempted to circumvent it through my cousin's wedding, where they cornered me by the gift table to discuss this ridiculous situation. I calmly excused myself and later sent a reset email extending the pause until we can agree on basic interaction parameters. By the 4th week, signs of adjustment began appearing. My mother sent a text, just one, not the usual barrage that simply read, "When you're ready to talk, we are too. No pressure." It contained no guilt-inducing language, no references to my cruelty or their worry. This simple message represented significant progress in respecting the boundaries I'd established. 2 days later, my father followed with an email lacking his usual condescending tone. "Your Aunt Rebecca suggested we may have overstepped. Not our intention. Would like to understand your perspective better when you're open to sharing it." These tentative olive branches allowed for cautious re-engagement. I responded with appreciation for their messages and suggested a phone call the following weekend. A deliberate choice, offering connection while maintaining physical distance. The call, while occasionally tense, remained largely productive as I re-emphasized my boundaries, and crucially, they actually listened without immediate dismissal. 3 months after the initial confrontation, we reached a fragile but functional understanding. My parents would call or text before any visit, waiting for affirmative response before arriving. They no longer commented on my home organization or decor unless I specifically sought their input. Most significantly, they began recognizing me as an independent adult with valid preferences rather than a child making choices they needed to correct. The first respectful visit occurred 4 months after the incident. My mother called 3 days in advance, asking if Sunday afternoon would be convenient for them to stop by. She specified they would stay for approximately 2 hours and asked if there was anything they could bring rather than assuming what I needed. My father called the morning of the visit, confirming their arrival time and checking if it was still convenient. These seemingly small courtesies represented monumental shifts in our dynamic. During the visit itself, my mother visibly bit her tongue when she noticed I'd painted my guest room a deep blue she would never have chosen. My father refrained from interrogating me about my retirement contributions when I mentioned a work bonus. They were clearly making efforts, however uncomfortable, to respect the boundaries we'd established. As our relationship recalibrated, I noticed positive ripple effects throughout other areas of my life. The confidence gained from standing firm with my parents translated to greater assertiveness at work. During a project planning meeting, I respectfully but firmly pushed back when my ideas were repeatedly interrupted, earning a nod of approval from my supervisor and setting a precedent for more equitable team dynamics. My newfound boundary-setting skills improved my dating life as well. When Michael, a man I'd been seeing, casually began exhibiting some concerning controlling behaviors, texting repeatedly when I didn't respond immediately, and questioning my independent social plans, I addressed it directly, rather than accommodating to keep peace. Instead of escalating as I feared, the clear communication actually strengthened our connection, leading to a more balanced relationship built on mutual respect. Even my friendships benefited from this personal growth. I found myself more comfortable expressing preferences rather than defaulting to people-pleasing behaviors. When my friend Jordan suggested a restaurant I disliked for our monthly dinner, I simply offered an alternative rather than silently acquiescing as I would have previously. This authenticity paradoxically deepened our connection, rather than creating the conflict I would have once feared. 6 months after that Tuesday evening when I found my parents in my living room, I hosted a small housewarming party, the proper celebration my home deserved. My parents attended as invited guests, arriving at the specified time with a thoughtful housewarming gift, a custom address stamp I had actually mentioned, wanting rather than unsolicited home improvements. Watching them interact respectfully with my friends, colleagues, and neighbors, introducing themselves without embarrassing childhood stories or undermining comments, I felt a complex mixture of emotions: pride in our collective growth, gratitude for the difficult but necessary confrontation that catalyzed change, hope for the evolving relationship we were building on healthier foundations. That evening, as my father helped clean up without rearranging my kitchen, and my mother complimented my home without suggesting improvements, I recognized the profound truth that had emerged from this challenging chapter: ownership extends far beyond property deeds and mortgage payments. True ownership encompasses your decisions, your boundaries, and your right to define relationships on mutually respectful terms. The house keys in my pocket represented more than access to physical space. They symbolized the authority to determine who entered both my home and my life, under what conditions and with what expectations. This authority wasn't selfishly guarded, but thoughtfully administered, creating space for genuine connection rather than obligatory compliance. As my last guests departed, and my parents prepared to leave without assumptions about staying over or returning unannounced, my mother paused at the door. "Your grandfather would be proud of this place," she said simply. "And of you." The comment, free from manipulation or hidden agenda, felt like the final confirmation of our new dynamic. We had traversed a difficult path together and emerged with something more valuable than unquestioned access or authority. We had built mutual respect. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is say no to those you care about most, not out of rejection or spite, but from commitment to authentic relationship. In establishing these boundaries, I hadn't lost my family. I'd created the foundation for a healthier one. Have you ever had to set difficult boundaries with family members who didn't respect your independence? Share your experience in the comments below. If my story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more real-life lessons about navigating complicated relationships. Thank you for listening, and remember, owning your boundaries is the first step to owning your life.